Well, our race industry, preaching reconciliation, showing such hatred.
Australia hasn't burned to the ground.
Have we ever seemed so divided by race as we are now? Let me show you just what the kind of stuff I'm listening to on our ABC, our national broadcaster.
Buzz! Whitey! On your colonisation. Hurry up! Oh. Burn this place to the ground!
I think violence is okay. So I think that's a really good stuff.
And their targets now, anyone can now be a racist. The revolution's eating its own. Anyone can be a racist. Even Collingwood President Eddie McGuire, who's subscribed to all sorts of Aboriginal causes, now forced to resign this week after unproven claims that he's a racist leading a racist club. Even his tears on resignation are mocked by a Greens senator on the ABC, who now calls Andrew Forrest racist as well. This is a billionaire philanthropist, got an Aboriginal goddaughter, a man who spent a fortune on Aboriginal causes.
We actually refer to them as white tears. I immediately thought of Twiggy Forrest and how, you know, there's all these do-gooders out there that think that they're doing the right thing, but they can still be racist.
But apparently you can't criticise any of this if you're white.
I am a white woman, and so I am asking the questions in this interview based on what comes into my mind on my personal experience. And so that restricts the terrain that you can go onto with your answers.
Now, with that in mind, I've decided to invite along two people I have long respected, two very insightful commentators who fortunately both do have Aboriginal ancestry, so I presume have a licence to speak on this. One is Jacinta Price from the Centre of Independent Studies, also the Deputy Mayor of Alice Springs, which I think is pretty cool, and Dr. Anthony Dillon, a postdoctoral fellow at the Australian Catholic University. Jacinta, like you, I'm against racism, but all forms of racism. The problem with our race movement, though, it seems to me at times to be encouraging racism, even exhibiting racism. Your view?
I agree wholeheartedly, and I think the problem is the fact that there are people out there just hell-bent on finding racism where it doesn't exist. I mean, if your main concern in life is racism, well, then you're going to find it or you're going to invent it where it doesn't actually exist, and it's not contributing meaningfully in any good way to the wider community. I mean, we are far more divided a country now since this witch hunt has begun, and the witch hunt isn't going to stop. I feel like it's just cranking up, and there are people who are national leaders who are far more concerned about shallow issues like this than actually addressing the real and the severe issues that marginalised Indigenous Australians are faced with. I mean, but we can't point out the differences in the Indigenous community. We're not allowed to do that. If you can identify as Indigenous, if you have one ancestor who's Aboriginal, then you are an Aboriginal person, the same as someone like my mother who is Warlpiri and Warlpiri only. But we're not allowed to talk about those differences. We're not allowed to talk about the fact that it is Aboriginal people of no other descent living in remote communities who have their language, who have their culture, who are suffering the most, who are the most vulnerable, who aren't concerned with racism around every corner, but are concerned with the much more severe issues that they're faced with on a daily basis. But we're not allowed to point that out because we're detracting from these shallow individuals who are on a witch hunt.
Yeah, and of course you'd be hogging the limelight from people who can't show us a single Aboriginal ancestor and still identify as Aboriginal. Did I say Bruce Pascoe? Anthony, critics like Lydia Thorpe, in fact, you know, there was that mass letter that just before Eddie McGuire had to quit saying Eddie McGuire is a racist, his club is structurally racist. They say that Australian society is structurally racist. I'm not quite sure what all that means, but yeah, I get the racist bit. Is Australia that bad?
No, definitely not, Andrew. I mean, you get people like Lydia and others who love to just shout racism, systemic racism and microaggressions and casual racism and that sort of thing. Now, none of that's not to exist that racism doesn't exist, but nowhere near in the quantities which they are preaching. And, you know, sadly, once these things are thrust onto the public, many people want to believe them. No proof is offered. And, you know, if someone wants to make a claim, that's great, but back it up with some evidence.
Prove it, exactly. If he's really a racist and you got the proof, I'll damn him too. That's fine, but I'm not going to join a witch hunt. I saw, by the way, I showed you, Jacinta, the ABC's Lee Sales virtually apologising as a white woman for asking questions of the black ex-player that condemned Eddie McGuire, Herikira Lumumba. Isn't this cringing? You know, I'm a white woman masking you, but isn't this cringing exactly the kind of racism I thought we should be trying to get rid of?
It's feeding into it. It's feeding into the nonsense narrative. It's also feeding into this idea that it's okay for Indigenous people, for black people, to have a go at white people constantly and point them out on, you know, these racially vilify them based on the fact that they are white people. You know, it is encouraging that side of things, and it's encouraging this ridiculous notion that, oh, you can't be racist if you're black or if you're Aboriginal. Is utter nonsense. It's ignorance from one particular group of people toward another group of people, and it is being encouraged, and it's detrimental. It's detrimental for our children. It's unhealthy. It's not doing anything to alleviate racism, but on the contrary, I'm sure it's encouraging the real nut jobs to come out and to want to push back. I mean, there's a lot of goodwill toward Indigenous Australians,
Jacinta, you've nailed
and it's killing
it.
that.
This is actually going to encourage a pushback by real racists, and then we've got a real problem, racists on both sides. I'm out of time, Anthony Dillon, but just quickly, is it true that you know whites can't query blacks? That somehow it's illegitimate, and people who identify as Aboriginals crumble under the scrutiny? What is this?
Yeah, I mean that's a form of racism itself. You know, topics on racism and Aboriginal affairs is everyone's business. Everyone is entitled to have an opinion, and others are entitled to challenge people of their opinions. But no, you shouldn't be silencing people and just say, you know, only Indigenous people can talk about this. And, you know, so often we hear this lived experience. You know, I have lived experience. If you don't...
Look, it's ridiculous. Suddenly your white ancestors can't say anything, but your black ones can. I mean, it's just ridiculous. This is... What madhouse are we getting? Jacinta Price, Anthony Dillon, what a pleasure to catch up with you both. I so admire the work of both of you over the years and your courage. Thank you so much indeed.
Thanks, Andrew.